Your child might not be communicating to you at 9 a.m. that something bothered them, but there was 72 other sensory things that impacted them throughout the day. And then when they finally get home to you at the end of the day, it's like chaos, you know, because their body finally is like, we have had too much. Our cup is overflowing.
Welcome to All Things Sensory by Harkla,
your go-to podcast for practical insights on sensory processing and development from an occupational therapy perspective.
Before we jump into the episode, we want to give a quick shout out to all the occupational therapy practitioners out there because April is Occupational Therapy Month and we're celebrating in a big way. All month long, we're offering our OTs a build your own course bundle where you can mix and match Harkla's OT approved courses and save up to 50% off depending on how many you grab. So if you've been wanting to deepen your understanding of sensory regulation, primitive reflexes, or practical strategies you can use in sessions, this is the time of year to stock up on our courses. Click the link below and check it out.
Hey there, welcome to All Things Sensory by Harkla. We're so happy to have you here today. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda.
And we're pediatric occupational therapy practitioners who love all things sensory. Clearly. Yes. We're talking about all things sensory. And that's the name of the podcast. So today we're actually going to break down sensory integration, what it means, and how it really impacts a child getting through their everyday life. And honestly, you, the adult, the parent, the teacher, the educator, whoever you are listening, you'll probably have some of those aha moments today where you realize, oh, I didn't realize that was a sensory thing that I did, or I'll be darned, like my kiddo probably got their sensory quirks from me. And hopefully you'll have those aha moments, because that's our goal, is to make it easy to connect to and to really understand.
Yeah. And I think it's important to know, we all have sensory systems.
Yes.
And we all have different sensory needs. So it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's wrong with your child. It's just their own sensory needs and quirks, and finding out what works for your child and their different systems is what we're here to help you figure out.
Exactly. And hopefully by the end, you'll have the ability to put your sensory goggles on and you'll see every experience that your child goes through as a sensory experience, and you can peel back the layers and realize maybe why they're avoiding certain topics, or why they're avoiding certain activities, or why they're craving certain things, why they're jumping and bouncing and moving and grooving. And really, hopefully it will put everything into perspective, and you'll just have that deeper understanding of your child's needs as well as yours.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So when we think about sensory integration, it really comes down to your body and your brain's ability to have a sensory experience, get that message, get those signals interpreted in the brain, your brain's ability to organize that input, and then have an appropriate adaptive response, right? So for just like a physical example, you hear a fire alarm at school, right? That's auditory sensory input. You hear it, you have like a kind of a quick like heart rate increase, right? Because you're like, oh dear, something's happening. And you get up, you leave the building, you have an appropriate adaptive response, you recognize that everything's safe, and then you can go back inside, your heart rate returns to a normal beat, and you can go about your day, right? So for a kiddo who maybe doesn't have that same adaptive response to a fire drill, it sends them into fight or flight. They can't tolerate that loud noise. They cover their ears. They climb under the desk. They panic.
Yeah. I feel like their ability to interpret sensory input sometimes is just disrupted. Like it's coming in, they might be organizing it correctly, but then it's just not being interpreted correct. And that's when we see those like fight or flight responses. I feel like the fire alarm is somewhat appropriate to have a fight or flight response to, because we're supposed to flight from that. But like those little things that are coming through, like, the small noise in the background, or, a small dog barking, or a tag brushing against your sleeve. Like when we have a fight or flight response to that, that's when I'm like, okay, the body may be struggling with organizing and interpreting this.
Okay. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but because you're new here, you may not have heard. But the reason why I first go to the fire drill is because my brother told me that when he was a kid, he was petrified of loud noises, specifically the fire alarm. So if he had an inkling that there was going to be a fire drill in school that day, he remembers trying to color with his elbows and use his pencil with his elbows so he could cover his ears. that is not an appropriate adaptive response, right?
No, it is not. That's impacting your daily routine.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, how did your teachers not know?
How did he... Yeah, how was he like? How did he know that a fire drill was maybe coming? It'd been a while.
Probably had been a while. He probably overheard the teachers talking about it. I think he's just a very highly in tune with his surroundings. That's because crazy. It made him uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's wild.
Yes.
I actually get very triggered by the fire alarm systems at our schools, and I get genuinely upset with staff, and I know they're not allowed to tell us because that's the point of a drill.
Yes.
Just a practice. But if it goes off and I'm at my desk, I'm like, oh, no one told me this was happening today.
Yes.
And then I get disgruntled for, 30 minutes.
And then you have a hard time. It's that resiliency of your nervous system coming back down to that, regulated state.
Yeah, I got to work on my resiliency.
Yeah, we all do. It's okay. Trust me, I've got a whole bout of issues we're not going to go into today.
Maybe this podcast will help me become more organized.
Yeah,
we'll see.
It's the only hope.
It's the only hope I have.
So, getting back to it, really the goal here with sensory integration is you get the input, whether it's movement, whether it's, you've got your 8 senses, so you get input from one or multiple of those senses, your brain interprets it, organizes it, and then you have that appropriate response, right? So when we're really thinking about it, it's almost like a traffic jam for kiddos with true sensory processing disorder. And we have to kind of caveat that and say SPD, sensory processing disorder, is not actually a diagnosis. It's not in the DSM. So when we say sensory processing disorder, just know that we're like classifying the symptoms. So those signals that are coming in, they're getting mixed up. They're too strong. They're not strong enough. And they're just not getting where they need to be efficiently. So I think a really important area to explain when it comes to sensory integration is the sensory modulation side of it, right? Because that's typically, I think, what we work with and what we see and what people know and are familiar with. So we have over-responsive, we have under-responsive, and then we have sensory craving. So let's kind of break down maybe what we'll see with over-responsive, under-responsive, and craving.
Yeah. I feel like most people see like that craving and that under responsive a lot, but when you have the over responsive or those hypersensitive kiddos, it really shows. I've have a few kiddos that come into my classroom for OT in the school that I work for, and you can just tell those kiddos that are very cautious with everything. Most kids want to get on the swing, they want to get on the trampoline, they want to do all the things, but I have a couple that are like very fearful, very cautious to step on anything. They're like, no, thank you. You know, I don't want to get on that. They are expecting the door to slam when it closes. So they're like covering their ears before a door closes. They maybe dislike you helping them put their jacket on because they don't even want that like unexpected touch. They're just very cautious and overly aware of what is going on in their surroundings.
Yes. And there's some really interesting research as well that connects kids who are over responsive to them being adults later and being anxious.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which makes sense. I mean, they're highly sensitive. They're anxious already about the sensory input. And then some of the research is showing that connection between anxiety and adulthood.
You can see how it impact even just like those play social skills, like on the playground, because kids are so fearful, that a peer might come and like push them further than they would like on the swing. And so they might avoid those social interactions with peers just out of, true fear of like, this is going to be too much for my sensory system.
Exactly. So we like to talk about this from a perspective of a cup, right? An analogy as a cup. And so for our kiddos who are over responsive, generally when we wake up in the morning, these are the kiddos who have, I like that you said they're like the size of an espresso shot, right? They've got a really tiny cup and they wake up in the morning and that cup is like already filled to the top with sensory input. So just the slightest little extra and they're melting down and it's too much and they can't have that appropriate adaptive response and modulate the input. So then let's move over to our sensory under responders. And these are the ones who, starting with our cup analogy here, they're the ones who wake up in the morning and their cup is a regular, what would you call it? A regular size Yeti cup.
Yeah, 40-ounce Yeti cup. It's huge.
Yep. And they wake up with it being empty. And they're constantly trying to fill it up and fill it up and fill it up with movement and touch and input, just trying to get it to register. So that way they feel like you and I feel right now, like comfortable and regulated, and we can focus on what's important in the moment. But these kiddos, there's typically passive under responders and then our sensory cravers.
Yeah.
And these passive under responders are like the bumps on a log too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I feel like for those kids that are under responsive, a lot of times, and it's a skill that we have to practice to help them learn, because they're trying to fill their cup up, but typically they don't know how to appropriately do it. No. And that's how we see them be like bouncing off the wall and dysregulated, because they're trying their very best, but they don't have the appropriate tools to fill the cup up with the right amount of stuff.
And specifically, I see with the under responders who are passive, they try and crave the wrong type of input. So even though they need to move more, they need more of that input for it to register, they crave the input that's crunchy carbs, white, yellow, comfortable carbs. They also tend to go down the rabbit hole of video games, and they get that, they fill their tank with video games and easy input rather than having to work for it and having to meet that need. Where on the other side, the cravers need more input. They know they need more input, and they are doing everything they can to meet that need.
That's a good differentiation between the two.
And I think about their cups. Yes, they have the big cup, the big Yeti cup, but it has holes in it too. So we're filling it up and we're filling it up, and they're jumping and they're crashing and they're moving and they're touching and they're feeling and they're listening. And the input is just spilling out, and we could never fill it up because it's holy.
Yeah. But how do we, the important question here is like, how do we help fill those holes, and like, how do we get enough in there so that they can participate in their daily routines?
That's the golden question.
It is. It truly is.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. But I think we should talk about next the 8 senses, because I don't know if you remember this, but when I was in elementary school, it was, you have 5 senses.
Yep.
That is all. And even when I was in school, because I graduated back in 2014, we didn't even learn about interoception.
Yeah. We didn't really either.
The 5 senses, here's some secret ones that you should probably know about. And then, 5 years later, turns out there's one more.
Yeah. It was like vestibular is like, your inner ear. And we're like, the inner ear. Yeah. And like, that was like it. Yeah. Even proprioception wasn't really like talked about a ton.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So, shocker, you have 8 senses, and these hidden 3 actually impact you the most. So you have 8 senses. You have to process and modulate each sense individually, but also simultaneously as well. With your over responsive, under responsive, and craving, you can be over, under, craving to all of these, to a mix of these. I feel like most people are a mixture of over, under, and craving.
This is where it gets crazy.
Honestly, yeah. I feel like our autistic clients are typically under responsive to this hidden 3 and over responsive to our far senses, the typical 5. But let's briefly explain the 8 senses.
Yeah, so you've got tactile, which is touch. That's anything you're feeling on your hands, your clothes, walking on sand and carpet, those kind of things. You've got, auditory.
Wait, hold on. I think one thing that is helpful with a tactile system is it's always working.
So true.
Right? Like, we have to process and modulate the clothes on our body.
But we don't think about it.
Subconsciously.
Like, people that don't have an, processing issue with tactile, you don't really think about it much of the day.
But if there's a tag in the back of my shirt, it's all I can think about.
So true.
And I can't focus on what's important because there's a tag that's bothering me, and my sensory system is like, heck no.
Yeah. And I feel like our skin system is so complex.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's hard for our brain to know exactly where it's coming from and why it's bothering you. So it takes us longer to be like, actually, that is my sock slowly creeping down, and it's been bothering me, but we don't realize it until later.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of these are really protective measures, right? True. Like, your tactile system tells you if there's a bug crawling on you and you need to brush it off, right? So it's really there to protect you. Same with the auditory system, right? If you hear a tiger crawling up behind you, your sensory system alerts you, and that way you need to have an adaptive response and run away or fight. If someone calls your name, are you turning and looking at them? Are you walking towards them? You know, what are you able to filter out if we're having a conversation here, but I also hear that really interesting gossip over there. I want to listen to that, but I also have to try and listen and be appropriate and talk to you, but this is boring, so I'd rather hey now. I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's our auditory system. It's wildly fascinating.
It is. I feel like that's an important one. Vision, our visual system. That one's kind of, it seems like an obvious one, but you don't think about like I think about us sitting here, we've got lots of lights going on when we're recording, and it can be really, you don't even think about it, but it can be really overstimulating to your nervous system to be under bright lights. The classrooms, a lot of the lights in there are those really old school fluorescent lights, and they're like subtly flickering in the background, and it just, by the end of the day,
bad for you.
Yeah, it's getting under your skin. We think all about like the blue light blocking and stuff now that exists out there, but it's all connected.
Well, what's fascinating about the visual system is it's not necessarily how well you can see or visual acuity. It's, again, what can you make, like what makes sense out of what you're seeing? You know, can you go to the grocery store and look for one very specific thing in the aisle and kind of tune out the distractions, right? It's what can you focus on in the moment that's important. That's always what helps me remember, like when we're talking about sensory and how it truly impacts you. It's like, what's important in the moment? Can you focus on that? You know, I always think about my husband who's like, where's the mayonnaise? And I'm like, well, it's right there in the refrigerator. And he's like, no. I'm like, it's right there. Right
in front of you.
Right there. Yeah. It's your visual system.
But yeah, also like organizing and interpreting what you're seeing, which I think so many of our, especially at my school age kiddos that are in occupational therapy, the things they're struggling with is, you know, they can obviously see it, but they're not organizing and interpreting it. And that's when, you know, our letters are backwards or reversed or upside down. And we're like, whoa, there is a huge disconnect here in their visual system.
Yes, exactly. All right. Gustatory and olfactory. I feel like we can kind of connect these two because they are so closely connected. Your sense of taste and smell.
Yep.
So again, safety, biological. If we smell something that smells old, we know not to drink it or eat it. If we taste something bitter, we probably shouldn't eat that. Yeah. You know, from like the caveman standpoint, I'm like, that's where it developed from. And again, you can crave certain smells, you can crave certain tastes and textures, and be sensitive as well to a lot of those. Yeah.
I've heard this before too, but especially with our gustatory system, you know, certain times we are craving and needing things based on things that we're lacking too, like based on certain nutrients or vitamins or water. Maybe we're craving, you know, you're craving something salty or sweet, you know, based on things that you're missing. So that's also tied in.
Definitely important to think about. So then let's move into our hidden senses. We'll start with the vestibular system. This is located in your inner ear, and it helps you identify what position your head is in. And it tells you if you're spinning, if you're upside down, if you're in a car with that mismatch of sensory input. And it's very alerting typically. So we generally say, you know, proceed with caution with vestibular input, especially for our sensitive kiddos. But in most cases, it's alerting sensory input.
I really like doing vestibular input for our kiddos that might be sluggish in school. A lot of times I'll see other teachers or people are like, oh, I just can't get them up. You know, they're just laying down. They're constantly sleeping in my room for whatever reason might be going on. You know, at home, they come back from my session and bang, they are awake because we are doing rotational vestibular input. We're going upside down on the exercise ball, but we are alerting their nervous system so that they're better able to learn. And so there's so many exercises and activities that you can easily implement to help with that. But that one's a good alerting system.
And even for adults, if you are having that crash in the afternoon, after lunch, and you want to go for another cup of coffee, I always say try some vestibular input. Get your head upside down, crawl, do windmills, do a down dog, and see if that alerts you enough so you don't feel like you need that extra cup of coffee, and you just get some vestibular input.
I love that. I actually need to start doing that a little bit more.
I literally told my mother-in-law, I was like, you need to start doing somersaults.
Stop. The 2 o'clock crash is real, though.
She actually started doing them, and she was like, yeah, I feel a lot better. Yeah.
Like really, truly rolling around.
Yeah.
I love
somersaults. I know. Which, it's fun to see grown-ups doing somersaults.
Yeah, I'm visioning that right now, and I need a video of that.
Good one. I'll work on that.
Okay, thanks.
We're celebrating Autism Acceptance Month in a big way, and 5 families are going to win some amazing sensory tools. For Autism Acceptance Month, we've partnered with Best Part to host a huge giveaway. 5 winners will receive prizes, including compression swings, weighted blankets, educational courses, and even a grand prize winner will walk away with the entire Harkla product line, our course catalog, plus a 1-year subscription to Best Part. The giveaway starts April 1st and goes through the 12th, so click the link below to enter the giveaway. It's quick to sign up, and there are also a few extra ways to enter for more chances to win.
All right, let's move on to proprioception, which is my all-time favorite sense, and it really just grounds you.
Yes.
And brings you back to earth, which is so cool. And you get the input from stretching and compression and input to the joints, the muscles, and the tendons. And while it's technically designed to help you with your body awareness, can you touch your nose with your eyes closed? It's also something that we as humans are not over responsive to. So in 99% of people, you aren't going to have an overreaction to proprioceptive input like you would with vestibular input, where you get motion sick or where you get dizzy or uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's why so many people love yoga so much and like feel so good afterwards, because the entire 30 minutes or an hour that you're in there, you're getting input through your feet, your hands, every joint is stretching, moving, getting pressure through multiple points of your body, and it just feels good.
Yeah. I think one of my secret ways that I love to share with my clients on how to get prop is hanging and traction. So like hanging from a bar and literally stretching the spine. I just feel like that's such an undercover way of getting traction.
Yeah.
And it's slow and controlled. Kids most of the time aren't bouncing and jumping and kind of being wild and crazy.
Yeah.
And it improves their posture and their hand strength and all the things.
I was gonna say grip strength, that's like huge. There's so much research coming out on like longevity and grip strength.
Yes.
So let's start it early on for our kids. Monkey bars. Like I feel like I never see monkey bars anymore anywhere.
I know. I'm like a kind of a weird person when I'm like, we go to the park with my kids and I'm like, oh, well, time to practice your monkey bars for 10 minutes.
Stop. I am not surprised. They're like, oh man, Mom, not again.
We just wanted to play. No, we have 5 minutes of monkey bar practice before anyone's going home.
I cannot with you.
I'm the worst. My kids love me, I promise.
Yeah, they definitely do. You're fun.
Okay, so proprioception, really important, really grounding. We use it to override potential overstimulation from the other senses. So if we're overstimulated by vestibular input, we follow that with prop. If we are overstimulated by auditory input, we use proprioception to kind of bring us back down centered. So such a cool tool.
Love that. And then last we have interoception, which this one is the hidden sense. I feel like it plays one of the biggest roles in regulation for our kiddos and for us as adults. I think it was something that I don't remember talking about a lot as a kid, of like, what are those feelings you're having? No. What does it mean when you feel hungry, you know? And I feel like the more we talk about it, the more in tune kids are with their different sensory systems and just regulation in general. But essentially it's that sense that helps us know if we are hungry versus thirsty, if we have to pee versus if we have to have a bowel movement. You know, it tells us about all of those, if we're hot or if we're cold. And I think a lot of our our kids struggle with that. You know, that they want to wear shorts when it's freezing out, or they want to wear sweatpants in the middle of the summer, and we're like, what are you doing?
And also another big one that I think goes under the radar is when you're eating, that moment of I'm full, I need to stop eating, or I'm full but then I keep eating, and then you throw up from overeating. Like they just don't recognize that balance of, okay, I'm full, so that's registering. The input is registering, right? That needs to register, interpret, organize all the things, and then we're done eating. Okay, great. It's like, nope, this is too good. I'm going to keep eating until I have an inappropriate adaptive response.
I laugh. I tell this story a lot to some of my friends and my clients, but I also think it could be a protective response as well with the eating thing, because growing up, my brother and I would always, you know, we'd get to go with my aunt. She would like take us to McDonald's or wherever, and secretly he'd be stealing my food because I was like a slow eater, right? And So I built this response to eat really, really fast because I was always worried that he was going to be stealing my snacks and my food, and no one would believe me. And I just wanted more, but he was really eating my food. So now as an adult, I eat so fast before my body has a chance to register that I'm hungry. And that was an adaptive response or protective response that I built as a child and still am working on to this day. So thank you, brother, for giving that to me. I'm going to have to send him this episode so he knows that I struggle with that 31 years later.
Thank you. Yes. I think where I struggle is that, you know, back in the 90s, love you, mom and dad, but we were required to finish the food on our plate.
So true.
And that was always really hard for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or food that you didn't like your body was like, oh, I just don't like that. And they're like, you are going to finish those scalloped potatoes. I don't know why that comes to mind for me.
You don't like scalloped potatoes?
I didn't as a kid. I love them now. I'm a potato. And now I'm in Idaho, so I have to.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But it was like, and I was like, those aren't even healthy. Why do I have to finish that?
They're not even healthy. They're so good though.
But they're so good. But yeah, why was that a thing?
I just think that's how they were raised.
True.
You know? Which I understand. That's just, you know, the generational thing. But now it's like, okay, well, if you're full, that's fine. We'll save it for later. And when you're hungry, you can eat it.
Yeah.
And if it's not what's sitting right with you, here's some other protein options, you know, and it's a little more flexible, but still they are learning those important rules and systems with meals and things like that.
And listening to them the first time when they're trying to communicate to us, because we're not all going to have the same responses. And that's like the really cool thing is that your ability to understand and interpret input, you know, how you might feel hunger cues is different how I might feel hunger cues, and how I might feel an urge to pee might be different than your urge to go to the bathroom. And so we can't always put that on our children, just explaining how we interpret or feel things.
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah.
So all of this information is great, right? It's helpful to know. But if you're listening, you may have an inkling. I've used that word twice now, which is interesting. You may have an inkling.
I like it. It's a cute word.
I don't even know if it's the right word for the moment, but I like it. So you may have an inkling for the 14th time that your child might have sensory concerns. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? How do you know if it's true? If it's impacting them? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I always try to share with the parents that I work with is if the sensory challenge is impacting their ability to function in daily life. If you are avoiding going out to the store with your child, if you're avoiding the playground, if you're avoiding school altogether, or, you know, different things and places, that's when it might be, you know, there might be something going on.
Exactly.
More than just like your typical sensory things.
Exactly. And we were talking about this before we started recording, but my son has always been on the sensitive side, and lately if his clothes don't feel right, he's kind of sending him into a meltdown. But what I was saying was that it depends on how regulated his nervous system is for the day. Some days he can wear the pants that he was melting down about yesterday because his nervous system was a lot more organized. And so I think that's important to keep in mind too. Is it happening every single day that they're melting down in regards to this, that, or the other? Or is it inconsistent? And do we need to focus more on regulation strategies before we're asking them to get dressed, eat a meal, or do some of those basic tasks?
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like different life routines, if you're traveling, if it's the holidays, like try not to look too much into it during those times. Obviously have the accommodations in your back pocket and work on that beforehand, but we're talking, you know, day to day, Monday through Friday, your typical week.
We do have a free checklist that we'll put in the description of this episode that will kind of give you an idea of, you know, where your child's sensory preferences are. Are they craving this type of input? Are they avoiding this type of input? And it's just a non-standardized way of kind of getting a clear picture of where their sensory needs are. So definitely take advantage of that resource if you haven't.
That's going to be so helpful.
So as you're going through that checklist, you may realize that there's marks that are more of like a sensory quirk, right? I just feel like we all have sensory quirks, but we all, you know, you and I sitting here, we can get through our day with these sensory quirks. You know, I prefer these types of socks, or I prefer this type of clothing, but I'm not gonna, I might have a meltdown. I should be careful what I say. I may be able to modulate in the moment and have that adaptive response, but, you know, internally my body is like, take this scratchy shirt off, you know? So I think that's the difference too. Like what Amanda said, if they're not able to get through their day, then it's more likely sensory processing disorder.
Yeah.
But if they're able to get through the day, and maybe you just don't like the feeling of the chalkboard on the nails or the nails on the chalkboard, but you know, you're getting through the day, I think that's helpful to keep in mind. And most of us have sensory quirks.
Yeah. Something just came to mind discussing that, though. I was thinking about how parents aren't always aware right in the moment, or kids aren't. It can be a delayed impact. So I've been thinking about this week has been a big week of sensory input for us while we're recording. This is like my first big week. And I'm like, whoa, in the evenings, like while I'm here, it's not really impacting me, but the lasting compounded effects that are throwing me off at the end of the day and making me a little bit more irritable and fatigued, but didn't impact me in the moment. And so that's really important to think about too as a parent. It was like your child might not be communicating to you at 9 a.m. that something bothered them, but there was 72 other sensory things that impacted them throughout the day. And then when they finally get home to you at the end of the day, it's like chaos, you know, because their body finally is like, we have had too much. Our cup is overflowing.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's too, you think about the fluorescent lights at school, you think about the loud noises at school. It's just like bombarding the sensory system. And most kids are able to hold it together at school with that social expectation. But then as soon as they get home, that's why a lot of kids are melting down and losing it. And because they're safe at home and they've held it together all day. And I can relate to that so much as well.
Same.
You know, it's like
you're not going to melt down in your business meeting, but when you get home to your partner and you're comfy and cozy, safe, you're like, I need to cry. You know, it's been too much today.
Exactly. So that's helpful to remember too. So kind of wrapping this episode up, there's a few misconceptions about the sensory system and sensory integration that we want to cover. The first one being that, you know, sensory modulation, sensory processing challenges, it's not bad behavior, right? We always say behavior is communication, and is it sensory? Is it behavior? Well, it's like, it's all connected. But a kid isn't, you know, purposely bouncing off the walls in most cases to be naughty. It's, and a lot of times they're communicating that their brain, their body needs more input in order to be able to sit down and focus.
Yeah, that's so good. It's not always solved by one tool or the same tool every single time. Like, you know, sometimes we might recommend something on here and you're like, ooh, that just did not stick with my child, or that did not work. And it's okay. It might not work today. It might work tomorrow. It might never work. So just trying out different tools and strategies for your child and what might work is key here.
Exactly. And another common question that I get is, will my child grow out of sensory processing disorder, sensory challenges? And I typically like to say no, but they'll learn to grow into it. And with the right tools, with the right modifications, with the right strategies and adaptations, ideally they'll be able to live comfortably in their skin. And that's always our goal with OT, is to make them feel comfortable and just like confident in their own skin with, you know, these tools or these strategies or these changes, you know. And like you said, it's not always one tool or one product. Sometimes just taking it back to the basics, like, when's the last time they've gone outside and seen the sun?
So true.
When's the last time they've been barefoot and put their feet in the earth, right? Like, I'm kind of a hippie when it comes to that sort of stuff, but I'm kind of moving away from the fact that we need this consumerism lifestyle of, oh, you need this and you need this and you need this and you need this. I'm like, you need the sun.
Yeah, let's get grounded.
Let's go for a walk and see how we feel. Like, that's what I find is so helpful. Like, turn the screens off, turn the bright lights off, and get grounded and get back to the basics.
Yeah. I also think, you know, as adults, we have accommodations and things that we use. Like, you've been chewing gum all week to help regulate, but that's like, you know, your oral regulating thing that you utilize. And we don't even realize as adults that we've made adaptations for ourselves over our lifespan, but our kids need that too. And they're just at the very beginning of their life and their learning process about their own sensory system. So, you know, just having grace for yourself and your child while you're learning their sensory needs and quirks is just important.
Absolutely. So all of this to say, because we've said a lot, we are sensory beings. Everyone has a sensory system. Everyone has different sensory preferences. What is calming for you may be alerting and noxious to someone else. And throw your sensory goggles on. Make sure that you perceive each experience that your child may be struggling with or you may be struggling with from a sensory lens, right? So I think that's important to take away. Anything else?
Yeah. I think the earlier you learn your child's sensory systems and needs, and the more you start to understand them as early on in life as possible, the better the support is going to be, especially when they get to that school age and, to better function in life.
And then I think the last thing that I'll end with is when you can proactively provide sensory input to your child, to yourself throughout the day, whether it's through movement breaks or, drinking cold water or going for a walk or getting outside. If you can proactively provide that input throughout the day, you can potentially avoid those sensory meltdowns later on, right? So instead of waiting till the last minute to, do a sensory diet, instead of waiting until it's too late, just start adding in more consistent sensory input and sensory strategies to eliminate potentially some of those meltdowns too throughout the day.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with that. Sprinkling it in, adding it in early, especially for our students throughout the day at school. Like if they're requesting to go get a drink from the fountain, teachers, let them go get a drink. They're going to get movement. They're going to get, regulating input from drinking the cold water. They're going to help their digestive system, early and often. As much sensory input as we can get.
Exactly. Make sure that you share this episode with anyone and everyone, because everyone needs to know how impactful the sensory system is just on everyday functioning. Make sure that you're subscribed to our channel. Make sure that you like this episode. Give us all your thoughts, your feedback. Share the love. We appreciate you being here, and we'll plan on seeing you next week for another episode.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to All Things Sensory by Harkla.
You can find links and resources from today's conversation right in the description of this episode.
If you want to connect, ask a question, or share what resonated with you, come find us on Instagram at All Things Sensory Podcast. We'd love to hear from you.
As a podcast listener, you get 10% off your first order at Harkla. Just use the code SENSORY at checkout or head to harkla.co/sensory to get started.
We're so grateful you're here and honored to be a part of your journey.
Everything we share here is for educational purposes only and reflects our professional experience. It isn't medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider for support specific to your child.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.